Hi friends, it's Sami Cohn and welcome to the very first episode of Generation Wisdom, the podcast where we bring you generational wisdom for today's woman. And I know you may be thinking, Sami, you promised us guests, you promised us all these amazing women. Well, at the beginning of each series, I'm going to take 10 minutes and talk to you about our word that we chose, the focus of that series, and how it was laid upon my heart to talk about this topic with these women. Now, if I'm being really honest, this topic that we're talking about in our first series, fearlessness, is something that was laid on my heart long ago. In fact, this whole idea was laid on my heart over a decade ago. So you're thinking, why did it take you so long? I know, I could have been a podcasting pioneer, but you know what? Fear got in the way. Fear of not doing it the right way. Fear of people not showing up to listen. Fear of people saying that they didn't want to be part of this conversation. And you know what? It's taken on different forms in my head and will likely take on different forms as we move forward. But what we're experiencing right now is a global pandemic. That's right. I don't know when you're listening to this, but as of the recording of this in April 2020, we are in the midst of COVID-19. Many of us have been self-quarantining for weeks. There are thousands of cases and thousands of deaths all around the world. And so there couldn't be a more timely time to talk about being fearless. But more important than that, what does it mean to have courage, to be brave, especially when we know the Lord? And so I've gathered women in different decades, in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s. And depending on what decade those women fall in, that's how long our conversation will be. And what I love about this is that I've gathered women, like I said, from all over, from different ways that I know them, but really from different walks of life: authors, musicians, friends, bloggers. The list goes on. We met in different places, we met during different stages, but they all have a powerful story of being fearless. So let's break this down. What does fearlessness look like? Because if we look at the Bible, it doesn't say that we will not fear. Now, there are some Bibles or some verses in the Bible that talk about, of course, not having fear, perfect love casting out fear. I will not be afraid, and we can claim those. But the truth is that we were born imperfect beings. And so fear exists. And you know what? I used to feel guilty for feeling afraid because I felt like, well, if I know Christ and my salvation is secure, I shouldn't be afraid. But that doesn't negate how we feel as women and how we feel as human beings. So the best that we can do is recognize that fear, learn ways to combat it, to surrender it, to acknowledge it, and more importantly, not feel shame over it. And so I'm going to be talking with Jasmine Murray, a contemporary Christian recording artist in her 20s, who literally wrote a song called Fearless. And you know what? It came out of a really vulnerable place for her. It came out of a place where she was experiencing panic attacks and some things that she had never experienced before. And by all stretches of the imagination, she has lived a very successful life in her short amount of years. She's competed in the Miss America pageant. She was on American Idol. And yet she still had these negative voices plaguing her. Well, in our 30s, we have my friend Annie F. Downs, as you may know her. And Annie literally wrote a book on being brave called Let's All Be Brave. And so what I wanted to talk about with Annie was, again, how do you be brave? How do you stand up in the face of something scary when you don't feel like you've got it within you? And Annie is known as a loud laugher. She's a 7 on the Enneagram. She is just a great person to be around. And so to hear Annie's stories of how she can still be brave in the midst of things that scare her, in the midst of the unknown, in the midst of stepping out into new things, has been so powerful for me to not only hear, but to see walked out in her daily life. Moving into your 40s, it is my friend Rachel Marie Martin, who also wrote a book specifically for moms called The Brave Art of Motherhood. And even if you're not a mom, I know you're going to get something really powerful from her message. It's incredible how some of these experts, and I'm doing air quotes if you can't see me, on bravery have been able to write about it because they have stood up to something that scared them. It doesn't mean that they are wearing a big, David and Goliath kind of shield and sword. It doesn't mean that they figured it out. It doesn't mean that they're not scared by things still. But what it means is that they took a step. And Rachel so beautifully told us about stepping forward, even in the midst of the unknown, even in the midst of being told she shouldn't, even in the midst of listening to people that she thought cared for her and had her best interests at heart, but being able to listen to that sometimes a very still, very small voice inside of you to know, yes, you can, and just taking that next step forward and being present, not listening to the naysayers and not worrying about what's to come, but really being focused on where you are in the moment. My friend in her 50s is Diana Sumter. Man, what a powerhouse. A retired military veteran, a national sales director with Mary Kay Cosmetics. She is really unlike anyone. And man, Diana encourages me every time I get to talk to her. She wrote a book called Stepping Out of the Box, and she just encourages me in a way where I feel like I can't not believe in myself. I mean, she talks about turning obstacles into opportunities, and she hasn't had an easy life, and she didn't go to college, and she didn't have everything just set before her. And yet she has found a way to not only trust in God, but to find a way to do things that she doesn't know how to do, that she might have been scared to do, but she kept the end goal in mind. And when you look beyond your fear, you're able to have something that you're fighting for and that you're working towards. And so I know that you are going to be charged up after you listen to Diana. And finally, my friend in her 60s is Barbara Rainey. She and her husband, Dennis, co-founded Family Life, and they just stepped out of that season. 2 years ago, they helped transition that. And can you imagine starting a ministry, working in it for over 40 years, and then allowing someone else to take hold of the reins? I mean, if that's not scary, I don't know what is. She is a mother to 6, grandmother to 24, and she is still so real, so vulnerable, and so raw. And I think for someone that's in that position that so many people look up to, she's written so many books, and yet she still doesn't hide behind anything. She just tells it like it is. She just wrote a book of prayers for women called My Heart Ever His. And to read them, it's like, Barbara, get out of my head. And you think sometimes you read these and you feel like, well, I don't know if this applies to me. Well, you feel her vulnerability in her words. And I know when I read it, they ushered me into the presence of God in a way that allowed me to put my own experiences in place of what hers were and to identify with her in a way I never had. And for someone that hasn't met her, to get to see a piece of her and hear a piece of her heart is so powerful. So wherever you are, whatever you're doing, I pray that you're encouraged, that you're empowered, and that you're enlightened by these stories. And more importantly, that you listen to the call of Generation Wisdom and start going to women in your life and encouraging them to share their stories. Start with a mom, a sister, a friend, and you don't have to be systematic about it, and it doesn't have to be literally by the generations. But when you start by listening to what someone younger has to say, and then build up to what someone older has to say, and then maybe share those ideas back with them, we're all going to learn from each other. We're all going to grow in a way we may never have thought possible. And we're going to have something so beautiful that's more precious than any tangible good we could ever have. So I am so grateful that I've been able to record these women's stories and be able to share them with you. I pray that you share them and pass them on, however you're listening to this, wherever you're listening or watching, because these are available on podcast and on YouTube, that you make sure to just really sit and take these words in, think about them as if they were your own, and then make sure you share your story. Make sure that you grab someone and you have a cup of chai, if it were me, and just really share who you are and what the word means to you. So ladies, let's get ready to be fearless and brave and courageous in a way that we never have before. This is Generation Wisdom Fearless.